Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop. And this week we've got another smaller building project. This week we're going to be making an adjustable depth push stick. Let's get creating. So if you've got a table saw, you will have undoubtedly one of these. This is obviously a push stick. Now, push sticks come in all different shapes and sizes. They come in cheap plastic ones that actually come with a device like this. You can get one, this is one I 3D printed myself, and this is a shop bought one. All of these push sticks all perform essentially the same basic function. You can spend anything from a couple of pounds on a push stick to one like this where you're spending quite a lot of money. And what I would like to do is to make my own push stick. Now I've got an idea in mind on what I want the shape and design to be. I've looked at lots and lots of different push stick designs on the internet, and I've come up with a sort of rough edge design that I would like to make. But the difference with my push stick is I'm hoping to make it adjustable. I work with a range of different woods, just like you do, I'm sure, all the way from 5mm all the way up to 22mm and beyond. So with my push stick, I'm going to see if I can build into it a little way of raising it depending on the size of wood that I've got. Now, I've got quite a nicely established pile of wood here, and I've got some pieces of wood in my wood pile that are coming from other projects. I've got some old skirting boards, I've got some newly bought pieces of timber, I've got a whole range of different things, plywood, MDF. So I'm just going to have a look around and see if I can find a piece of wood which is roughly going to be the size I want. And for my push stick, I'm sort of aiming for a width of about 18 degrees. This is the push stick that I use, and you'll have seen this in most of my videos. And I've measured this, and it's just over 20. It's about 24 mil wide. So for me, this would be a good size, but when I'm coming to do sort of finer, intricate cuts, I find it's quite difficult to use. So then I have to switch to this design, and to be honest, I quite like the sort of fatness of this and the handle. So I want to incorporate something in there around a handle. So I'm going to have a look at the pieces of wood I've got, select a piece of wood, and then I'm just going to do a really basic design on paper, transfer that to the wood, put it in the bandsaw, and we'll take it from there. So I did take my time and look through all my pieces of wood that I had. I've got quite a few of these old skirting boards which are nice quality wood. I'm not sure what they are, but they do have quite a smell to them when you cut them. But eventually I settled on a sort of off-cut of a cheap piece of wood I bought and one of the old floorboards. They were the two bits I selected. Okay, so I found two pieces of board which are potentials for using for the push stick. I've got this which I'm not entirely sure what it is. It feels a bit like pine. It's an offcut from something that a piece of sort of bigger wood I got. What worries me is there are some slight sort of cuts in it where you can see the wood is cupping, and it's cupping quite significantly from sort of left to right as you're looking. Now in itself that would be a problem, and if I put it on the table you might be able to see there's quite a lot of movement in it. Let's move it back so you can see it. There's quite a lot of movement in it, but the good thing is the piece that I would need is sort of where that split is coming across. So the wood is pretty good to about here, and that's about the size that I would need. So that's my first alternative. Obviously I've got MDF, but at the moment I'm not considering using MDF because A, it brings in a lot of moisture. I don't find it's a particularly good wood to use for something like this. So my other choice is this, which is a set of donated floorboards. Now it's nice and flat. It's got a little ridge on the edge, but it has got a nice section in the middle. What it does have though are some cutouts where it was obviously ripped up, but to me I don't think that's being an issue, seeing that as being an issue, because actually I can use the bit that's inside both of those. It does need a bit of a clean up, but on one side it's absolutely perfect. Again, it's pretty straight. It is a little bit cupped towards the end, but as with my other piece, I think I've got enough of a section there that I will be able to sort of work with it. So what I'm going to do is put this into the miter saw, just cut it down to a sort of more reasonable size, and I'm going to compare the two and see which one is actually going to be good enough for the stick. I have to say I'm leaning more towards this one at the moment, but the other thing I've got to take into account is this one's actually not very big. It's bigger than the white one I've got, but it's not as big as my longer push stick, so I've got to make sure I've got enough depth so that when I'm using it, my hand is free of the blade, or not very close to the blade. So let's chop this wood up, let's compare it and see which one we're going to use.
So I ran the skirting board through the miter saw. That cut really easily. It's really nice wood actually. I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe somebody will know if you do, put it in the comments, but it smells lovely when you cut it. And then the other piece of wood, which is the sort of off-cut shot brought, I really struggled when I put that through the miter saw. You'll see in a minute, it really smoked. And at first I thought it was the miter saw smoking, but it wasn't. It was the blade making the cut. I'm not quite sure why, because it went through the wood and well enough, just wasn't quite sure, but it made a clean cut in the end.
Okay, so now I've finished preparing the wood. I've actually got two really nice pieces of wood here, either of which I think would make a really good push stick. So I've decided to slightly adjust what I'm doing, and potentially I'm going to try and make a push stick out of this piece of wood and a push stick out of this piece of wood. Now obviously this one is going to be a lot smaller, and it might be a push stick that I use with my bandsaw or something like that. I'm just going to put a very small sort of basic design on it. I think it's just about long enough and just about big enough. If it was a little bit taller, if that piece of wood hadn't been so cupped and I could have used it, then I might well have been able to get a bigger stick out of it. But I think there's enough space there to get a sort of little miniature push stick. This piece of wood is nice and thick, and when it comes to putting in the sort of sliding mechanism with the idea that I've got in my mind, a thicker piece of wood is going to be much better for me. So this is the one that I'm going to use for the sort of main push stick. And this one I'm going to sort of keep and see if I can make something smaller out of it. So now the idea now is to just knock up a little basic design to go on here to use as the push stick. And I've got an idea of what I'd like to do. So I'm just going to knock up a sort of very quick sketch based on the size of this piece of wood. And let's see if I can get my idea to actually work in real life.
For this next whole section, I really took my time to make sure that I did a good job here. I did decide to ditch the other push stick because when I actually looked at it, the length and the depth on that other piece of wood really weren't good enough. And I knew that I wanted a sort of saw handle design, which is why I sort of offered it up. And I knew that my hand fitted comfortably in there, obviously, because I use that saw all the time. So I sort of got the rough design, squared it out, made sure it was nice and neat, went back over the lines just to make sure that I could see everything. And when I'd done that, I then just got a random top of a lid to get a good curve, went over everything in Sharpie marker, so A, it was easier to cut out, and also it still did give me a good idea of the sort of depth, just to make sure that I had it the right sort of size. It does look a bit like a saw, but when I'd cut it all out, I was happy with the design. And when I actually came to make the saw, it actually ends up pretty much looking exactly as it looks on this paper, which, you have to be honest, that doesn't always happen. So when I'd done and cut it out, I then got the piece of wood and I just very simply traced the outline images, or the outline of the image onto the piece of wood, pressed nice and hard with my pencil, so I had a really good outline, which it would let me then do on the bandsaw, which you're going to see in a minute. I did speed the footage up because it took quite a long time to cut this all out on the bandsaw. So as you'll know from previous videos, I'm not a massive user of the bandsaw, and it did probably took me a lot longer than some of you or most of you to make the cuts, and I did sort of have to nibble back a couple of times where I sort of overcut on one side, which I explain in a minute. But overall, good practice on the bandsaw, much needed.
Okay, so I finished it on the bandsaw. I think it's okay, but I also think it's sort of representative of my skill level on the bandsaw. It's not brilliant. It's pretty straight, but there are a couple of times when I caught the wood and I sort of put it back through to do it a little bit longer. The good thing is, it's in the exact shape I want it to be. It's not too heavy, and although I haven't cut a huge amount off, I've cut enough of it off to give me what I need and make it a little bit lighter. Now, the next problem or issue I'm going to have is the handle. My fingers do fit in the handle, as you'll have seen earlier. It's from my saw. It's just how I'm going to hollow that out. And I'm also thinking potentially about drilling some large holes in it to not make it so solid, because it doesn't need to be, and I think that's potentially just a little bit of extra weight it doesn't need. So I think what I'm gonna do is just drill through this using a large Forstner bit, get as much of it out as I can, and then I'll probably just pop inside it with my jigsaw and finish hollowing it out. So not the end of the world. Just one thing about that Titan bandsaw, and I know a lot of this is down to me and my inability, but there is a lot of wiggle in that blade, and before I used it off camera, I tightened it. I've tightened the blade, and it was absolutely like bowstring tight before I started, and there was quite a bit of walking during that process. I think it's probably just the limitation of the band. I mean, it's not a very big band, so it's sort of an entry-level one. But having just tightened it, I was a bit disappointed that there was so much travel in the blade when I was doing it. But then again, you know, this is thick floorboard wood, so I have to expect that. A lot of the issues I've got I can knock off with sanding, but it also does make me think potentially I need to run this through. Well, I need to get the round over route a bit on it and try and take off the edge, because it's a little bit sort of straight everywhere it goes at the moment. So I might just soften up the edges, or to be honest, I might just soften them up with my my sander when I come to give it a sand, because obviously the back is going to need taking back a little bit. So the next stage for me, let's attack this and try and get this handle out, hopefully without too many problems.
The next stage was the drilling, and I think this is a 9mm Forstner bit. I was incredibly careful here, and obviously I've got my drilling block underneath to avoid any tear out, but I was really, really careful making these drill bits, making these holes, because A, I wanted to leave enough material that the jigsaw could take it out easily, and B, obviously you've got to be careful when you're doing close quarter drilling like that, especially with the Forstner bit, because if that slips, it can make a mess of your hands. But I was happy with how I got it. I'd got enough in there to get a bit of purchase with the jigsaw, so after clamping it up, I just literally took it out. I just want to point this out before I get loads of comments about the strings of my hoodie hanging down. I didn't realise at the time, but actually the depth of field of this shot, they weren't as sort of close as they look. It's because I had the camera really high up and pointed down. Normally I remember to put those, tuck them inside my shirt, but to be absolutely honest with you, I completely forgot. So when that was done, I then used the roundover bit on my Ryobi hand router. Now, I've never used a roundover bit before. This was my first ever attempt, and I also realised when I watched the footage back that I'd forgot to put on both my glasses and my mask, so apologies for that. You should always have that when you're doing a project like this, and you can see from the amount of wood that's flying off the reason why you should do that. But I got it all on, and I was actually really, really pleased with the end result. It really took the edges off nicely. Then I just knocked the whole back thing with a sander. I did this with 2 grit of paper. I did it with 120 to start with, then I switched to 240 just to give it a nice smooth surface. The next stage was to mark out the sort of sliding thing, a sliding piece of wood that was going to give me my depth. I chose MDF here, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, it was readily available, and number two, I think this is a perishable stroke changeable part in the future. So I thought I'll go with the MDF, I'll see how it goes. If when I start using it I don't like it, I can easily change it back. I made a very, very, very safe cut on the saw there. I measured half the width of what this was and just put a mark, which would give me a sort of X where I can drill the hole that the nut's going to sit in, which you'll see in a minute. When I did make this hole, I was very, very careful doing this. This is quite speeded up, this footage, that bit, but I was very careful how I did it, because you've got to be careful with the drill like that. And the nut was just a tiny bit too big for the hole, which was on purpose. I then got my Poundland epoxy. This stuff is great. It's just as good as the Audi and Lidl epoxies, which I've also used. So I just sort of smeared around the outside. I didn't put any epoxy at the bottom. Then I was able to just push the nut in, but I did go and get my little pin hammer just to drive it all the way home. And then I just offered up the sort of turning bolt just to check it would work, which it did. Gave it another little hammer because it wasn't quite proud, and then again, being incredibly careful, I just ran the sort of depth part of the MDF through the table. So I took my time here. As you can see, I turned it over around. I didn't do it all in one pass. I layered the passes, so I wasn't putting too much stress on the router, and obviously then making it a lot safer. But I was very nervous doing this, I'm not going to lie. And although it looks like my finger is near the router, it actually isn't, because I'm only cutting sort of half of the wood and my finger is at the back the whole time. So I was very safe, and I remembered my mask this time, which was good. So when that was done, it was just a case of offering it up and testing it, and it worked an absolute treat. It was exactly as I wanted it to be. I did worry about the top bit moving as well, but that didn't happen. So then I thought nothing better to do than give it a quick old test, which is what I did, and it worked like an absolute dream. Exactly what I wanted. I was really, really pleased with how it turned out. Okay, so that's the end of the build. As you can see, the push stick is finished, and I have to say I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. It's a lot lighter than I thought it was going to be. If you remember earlier, I did say I was going to put some holes in here. I don't need to do it. It's very comfortable to grip, and on the back it's just a simple M8 bolt that's epoxied into the handle, and just a twist knob to allow it to go up and down. I think it will go about 25 to 30 mil depth at the moment. Just one thing, this handled bolt I've got on the back is too big, and when I was doing a cut, it just caught on the fence of the table saw. But to be honest with you, that's not an issue. Like I said, it's a standard M8 bolt. I could always use a bolt with a washer on it, but I think lying around somewhere, I've got something a little bit smaller than this, which I can put on it. But overall, I'm really pleased. I set out to make a push stick, which I have done. I set out to make it adjustable, which I have done. And the actual finished piece, I think, is really nice. So I'm really, really happy with how it's turned out. Thank you so much for watching this week's edition of the Garage Workshop. Over the next couple of weeks, I've got some slightly different videos coming up. So if you are new to the channel, please can I ask you to subscribe. Please like, please comment. If you are a regular contributor, thank you so much. My video last week in particular on the storage on my clamp cupboard had got a lot of views, and I got a lot of really good comments for that, so thank you so much. Again, next week another video coming up from the Garage Workshop. Take care, fellow woodworkers. Bye bye.